Okay, so I've started recording now. So welcome everyone. So this is the December edition of HAILIE, and we've got two guest speakers this month. I wanted to give a little quick update from the organising committee. So there are 10 of us now organising these events for you. I just wanted to share that we are making progress on the strategy for next year. So that's the whole 2026 strategy, including what we are thinking in terms of the speaker lineup. So we've got about a quarter of the speaker lineup sorted for next year, but also about the resources that we think are going to be the right ones to support the sector. I think so. A lot has happened in AI since we last met. So I just wanted to draw out a couple of those bits. So do you remember like Michael Burry from The Big Short? He did his shorting of AI since we last met, which is kind of crazy that was in the last month. We also had Gemini 3 Pro released in the last month. This week, we had OpenAI go code red and stop all of their shipping of the ad stuff because of the progress that other providers are making. So ChatGPT has gone into kind of a crisis mode this week. We have UK pension funds this week announced they're cutting back their exposure to US equities because there's too much invested in AI right now. And sort of with all of this going on, what I wanted to do is really make sure we were focusing on value for tenants and value for our organisations, which is why I'm delighted. We've got two great speakers. We've got Batley, who's going to be talking about what he's been doing at Together Housing. So this is award-winning stuff. And then we have Phil McCavish, who's speaking about an idea about transforming some of the way that we do our contract management. And both of these are really transformative things, which aren't just playing around the edges with AI, but it's more about core process. So first up, we'll have Stephen. And so it's two halves until 1:30 is Stephen, and then the 25 minutes with 5 minutes to close at the end for Phil. So over to you.
Thanks, Guy. Morning, everybody. Let me just fire up the technology. So hopefully you can see that.
Yep, you can do it in presentation mode if you want.
Can I? Well, how do you do that? Sorry,
the green bit top left from play from beginning, and that'll do you.
Oh, sorry, right, yeah. Oh, in that, yeah. That's it. Yeah. Okay. So, morning, everybody again. I'm Stephen Batley, Assistant Director for Business Improvement at Together Housing. Just to position myself, I am not a technical expert. I am not an AI expert. I'm a housing manager by trade, worked my whole career in social housing, predominantly in housing management, but also in customer services, and then more latterly in business improvement for the last sort of 7 or 8 years. For those that aren't aware, but with the usual sort of positioning slide, I work for Together Housing, 37,000 properties across Yorkshire and Lancashire, the M62 corridor, based around Calderdale, Blackburn, Wakefield, and Rawtenstall, etc., Rossendale. Obviously, the Yorkshire side is best. I have to say that in every time I mention that. My presentation's entitled Luddite to Lightsaber, really, and I suppose it's not just about AI, it's leading up to that point, but it's also about our data journey. And why Luddites? Well, I think I'm also here as part of the sort of Luddite Society, or to give them a better name, because Luddites, it's tended to be known as people that are scared of technology and oppose technology in and of itself, and that's not necessarily the case. It was more around the impact. They were actually artisans that used technology and used machines, but they were actually opposed to the use, the deployment of technology in the elements of eliminating skilled labour without any social safety network, producing inferior goods that undermined craft standards, and the fact that it concentrated wealth in a few factory owners' pockets. And that sounds quite familiar with where we are now in a different scenario with AI and technology. I'm actually from a village called Marsden in Yorkshire, and one of the blacksmiths there produced a machine that helped with the cropping process, and it had those hammers, and you can see on that picture there, the hammers were actually stripped out of the machines, and they had a phrase of Enochel Meckham and Enochel Breckham. So that's the sort of Luddite heritage. But as I said, I'm a positive Luddite, not a negative one. But I am a chap. Yeah, sorry.
I think we're not seeing the same slide as you're seeing.
Oh, no.
Exactly the same, because I want to see the hammer.
Sorry about that. Which one are you? Who one's still the first one?
Yeah, so we were still seeing your main slide. This is why we do the extensive testing beforehand, folks.
Yeah, which was like two seconds. No, come right out.
If you're running two monitors, Stephen, it maybe it's
no, I'm not. I'm just on my laptop.
If you hit F5, if you're on Windows, it should put it into presentation mode.
So you could, what can you see now? You can see the map.
It's there, but it's not in presentation mode. So if you hit F5, it should fire it up. Just press the self-destruct button.
Yeah.
Don't press the red button.
Okay, so we'll just hang around. I'm sure we'll be back. Technical issues, all good.
He was finding it. Just blame Cloudflare. He's finding a great flow there. Enochel Meckham, Enochel Breckham.
I know. Sad times.
Sorry, I don't know where I'm at with the tech. I've never used Google before. I usually use Teams or Zoom, so apologies everybody. I don't know what I need to do.
So if you just share your screen as you managed to do previously, and you just
I pressed F5 and it went somewhere different.
Yeah. So let's not press F5. So just share it and just navigate down. So keep it in that sort of mode and just change so we can see exactly as you see, I believe. So we've got slide 2, but we've also got the pane on the left.
Right. So can you see the Luddites and Star Wars now?
No.
No.
All right. I'm doing something wrong.
We genuinely did test this before we came online.
Well, we got it up. But we didn't actually move through the screen, so that's where I'm falling down.
You could go back to basics, Stephen, and share again. Go to the first slide, and then just use the use the button in the bottom right to the left hand side of the minus symbol. That sort of it's a screen on a stand is what it's representing. Bottom right. Like bottom right of the screen, see where there's a slider plus minus and it says 65% in the bottom right hand corner of PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah,
That's the one. Yeah.
And then you just control with right and left on the keyboard, and we should be able to see that.
It doesn't seem to be projecting, does it?
No, it's not.
Maybe just maybe use the plus arrow on the bottom right to make the slides a bit bigger, so we can see them, and then just click on the left menu through them one by one as you want. I'll have to do, I guess, if we can't get into projection.
Yeah, that'll be good enough.
Yeah.
Are you going through there?
Yes.
Is that the map and then now into Luddites?
Yeah.
Really sorry about this.
No,
I think we can read that, can't we? Yeah.
Perfect.
Sorry about this. Okay, so there's the Luddites, and that is why I'm a Luddite. But I did grow up in the 70s and 80s when Star Wars was very big, hence the Luddite to lightsaber. But okay, so has that moved on? So Annus Horribilis.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, right. Okay. Yeah, so our journey starts in 2017 at Together Housing when I first came into this post, and I was attracted by the sort of sexy technology side of things. But what I was presented with was a bit of a mess in terms of our data. And you can see there the HAT project back in 2017 was saying, you know, we weren't alone in Together Housing, that housing data was a mess. And I think it was because 3/4 of the organisation has got a stop transfer from local authority heritage, and I was part of the group that were pulling that together at the 11th hour, and it was literally cutting and pasting extracts from ledgers and putting them into documents. So it's kind of no wonder if that's our data heritage that it was a bit of a suboptimal, shall we say. But there were two events in 2017. One internal, which was we really struggled to get our regulatory returns, the SDR, pulled together because of the nature of that. You know, the 4 or 5 organisations shoving all their data into one system and trying to make that work. And then the other was the external tragedy at Grenfell. And one of the early things that came out of that was the fact that the landlord didn't actually know who was living in the properties. So they were real drivers for us to start to improve our data position, and we've been doing so from that point forward. Recognised quite early on that we needed to not just improve our data, that there was a factor of both people, process and the technology that sat behind it, and that's that 3-horse race, that the race horses there in a photo finish. You need all those horses progressing at the same pace. If one or the other are lagging behind, then again you're not going to be making the strides forward that you need to. I noticed on the delegates, somebody that we've worked with, Steve Dungworth, couple of 3 years ago now, we worked with Steve because we were wanting to recast our digital strategy, which we called our Empowering Together strategy. And that was moving away from our current data architecture into a new world. And we came up with a good metaphor for that, or analogy for that, is that the old system, our housing management system, we were on one of the main suppliers. It's like being in a big hotel, and a hotel's a nice place to live. It was the best hotel on the market at the time, we thought. But the problem with a hotel is you haven't got direct control of everything that happens there. If you want to make some improvements, you might have to close down a room or even a wing or even the whole hotel to be able to get those sorts of developments. And what we're moving into, we wanted control, we wanted to build our own estate, build our own houses on that estate, and we believe we're going along the Microsoft suite of products in terms of building that, taking advantage of all their suite of products. And we're doing that primarily through the, as I said, through the Microsoft 365 range of products, and then more latterly in terms of data through Microsoft Fabric. And we're just starting moving our data into the Microsoft environment, really. And just in terms of the data specifically, again, our analogy really is that we've got a central sort of dirty generator at the center. That might be our customer contact center and our housing management center, but we didn't put enough governance arrangements necessarily in around that, or people needed new systems, new databases, dare I say that data were spreadsheets. So there's almost like a shanty town of data receptacles and silos and systems developed around that core housing management system, which is that's developed for good reasons to meet service needs, but it's again suboptimal in terms of our data management. And what we want to do, we're moving into the dataverse, is creating those individual service area houses, for want of a better phrase. So there'll be rent house or a neighbourhood's house or a repair house, generating their own data or electricity with this analogy, but that data feeds and flows throughout the whole estate, and that's the advantage of having it all in the same place in the dataverse, and we're on that journey towards that. How have we done that with staff? I mentioned it's important around people, process and technology. Well, we had a big campaign and continue to do so around the quality of our data, love your data. So that's the cartoon on the left. In terms of Stacey Solomon's love your data, what is it? I can't remember what the program's called now. It's just gone out of my head. But anyway, the premise of the program is that you get all your contents of your house out, you lay it out in an aircraft hangar, you sort it all out, you send some to charity, you send some to the tip, and you put back what's useful back into the house. And again, that's the analogy we've used internally. One of the mistakes we made going back to 2017 was we didn't do enough tidying up of our data before we put it into that central new housing management system, which therefore causes problems further down the line. We're not making that mistake going forward. So we're using AI, as many people on the call, as many colleagues will be day to day through the Microsoft suite of products. Again, early days with that, but starting to see some small efficiencies in terms of day-to-day use, as everybody, in terms of meeting notes and summarising actions, etc. But moving into more specifically about AI and the work that we've done, and I was preparing a presentation around AI, and we've got a thing about salespeople, and apologies if there's any salespeople on the call, but back in the day they used to have pink ties and brown shoes, and I asked AI to generate me some images of a salesperson with a pink tie and brown shoes, and these are the images it came up with, which kind of made my point for me really, which is the left image is obviously perfectly fine. The second image is slightly flawed by the fact that the person's got 3 legs, and it just makes the point that AI, we can't trust it implicitly at this stage, and we need to put steps in place to check on the AI. And what we try to do with that is make sure that we put in humans in the loop, that humans need to be, their expertise will be in checking information, in validating information, and just putting a reality check on it, I guess. And that needs to be built into those processes. So we get the data in, AI may do something funky with it, but the human's in the loop before it then goes out and maybe provides a service or does some sort of calculations. But again, it's fed back in. So the human is central to all those processes. So I suppose the main reason we've been asked to speak is around our application of data science, and we've been quite early adopters of having data scientists. We're on about our 3rd or 4th. I mean, that's one of the issues, is attracting them in terms of salary, etc. But we've been blessed with some good internal data scientists. We did work with universities prior to that, and I just felt that whilst the work they did was quite good academically, it was almost like they were looking in the clouds down, and we just needed somebody from treetop level looking down at our data. So it was only when we got them embedded in our organisation that we really started to motor in terms of our application of data science and the use of AI. And as I said at the start, and that's why I said the sort of health warning, I'm not a technical person in terms of the application. I could see the potential, and I'm an advocate for it. But this is my sort of basic guide of what we've done, and I don't know much about AI, but I do know a little bit about football, although that might be questionable because I support Huddersfield Town. But we've come up with a great video, which we haven't got time to show this morning, but happy to share the link for colleagues as part of the presentation. And this is a really the video on a page, really, in terms of how the data science works. So basically, in my understanding, and apologies if there'll be experts on here that can correct me, but all the data, all the clever numbers stuff is getting done inside a black box through a neural network. And our analogy is like the neural network is like a football team of individual players, and they don't know how to score a goal. They don't know how to make the calculation that we're wanting to get out of it. But what it has got is the ability to learn, and it learns by listening to the crowd and how close they get to the goal. And that's the data scientist checking the outcomes of what the machine's coming up with. The advantages that it has got, it's got infinite time to learn and infinite stamina. So all these calculations are going on in this black box, and the ball's getting nearer and nearer and nearer to the goal until eventually we score a goal and we get the outcome and the research that we want, and we can apply it in the real world. For those that are technical on the call, and I'll say these words without knowing what they mean, but our tenancy failure model has been written in R, using our program, using a program called Cat Boost, and it's a decision tree model. So there you go. That's as technical as I'm going to get, but don't ask me any follow-up questions on that. And that's the link to the video. So what have we done with that information? And this is why I love this project, really, is we've combined the high-end data science and the use of AI within that with frontline old school housing management. And the problem we were trying to solve was the amount of tenancies that turn over, full stop, but primarily within the first 12 months. So we wanted to target resources towards the best placed to protect those tenants that are, when they first move in. So the model works out when each and every tenancy is going to fail. And I've picked up this point with our data scientists, because I've said, does that mean in effect the model is predicting when every single tenancy, all 37,000 tenancies, are going to end? And they've said yes. And I find that a little bit scary, given that the highest reason for tenancies ending is obviously through death. So in effect, the model's predicting in some way when some of our tenants are no longer going to be with us. But just putting that to one side, what it does do is identify those tenants within the first 12 months who was most vulnerable, and then we put some wraparound service from our tenancy support teams, our neighbourhood officers and income teams around those tenants to make sure that those tenancies are successful. So we apply that directly to as many tenants as we can, but there's wider learning for all our tenants in terms of some common themes that we can apply across the group. And in terms of the outcomes of the model, or the practical outcomes, we've seen our tenancy turnover reduce from 15% down to 6%. Now, there's all sorts of factors in terms of the market, etc. But we do know that this model and the practical application of this model has directly influenced that figure. And the figure of we've saved in excess of 3 million, and this figure's rising all the time because it's cumulative. And that figure's made up of reducing, minimizing arrears, minimizing the amounts of costs in terms of turnaround times and the work we need to do on empty properties. But crucially, it's about people, keeping people in their homes. And it was for this work in its entirety that we got the award earlier in the year, which we're very, very proud of. Where are we going next in terms of more in terms of the use of our data? Is we've just developed our own app, and this is the advantage of being within our own estate and being able to use Power Apps and the Microsoft suite of products. We've actually developed and deployed an app to be used for surveying properties and raising works and keeping tenants informed in response to AWAB's law and damp mould and condensation. So we've done over 700 surveys through that app and rising. So that's really practical implementation. Where are we going with the data science? We're using that now to predict voids, the repairs needed in empty properties, and also day-to-day repairs as well. So applications of the model in other areas. A future vision is around being able to be on a doorstep, a housing officer on a doorstep, and have all that information and that data to hand. And that's primarily through the, as I said, through the Microsoft suite of products and the application of Microsoft Fabric. I've just posed a few Luddite questions. I'm conscious I've gone over time because of my technical issues, but I just wanted to draw the parallel between those Luddites and their fears and some of the fears that we've currently got in these current times. And then the final slide is around that need for balance, the need for innovation and change on one side, with the need for control and governance and accountability on the other. And we're always trying to strike that balance between the two. And that is the end of the presentation. And apologies for
thanks very much, Tim. Well recovered.
Technical difficulties.
That's fantastic. And thanks for being brave on the new tooling as well. So what we'll do is we'll take questions combined at the end, I think, if that's all right. Just respecting time. If you have anything that you want to jot down, you can put it in the chat, and that'll give Stephen a bit of time to percolate, because I've got a few things that I've jotted down as well. So Phil, over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk hopefully reasonably quickly, so hopefully not too quickly. If it is too quick, you can always watch it back at half speed later, and that should work for you. So I'm just going to sort of describe myself or introduce myself just to start with, because that hopefully will give a bit of context. So I was kind of thinking about how best to introduce myself. So I went to Google and I put 3 job descriptions into Google, and I picked the first picture that came up in Google. And these were the 3 pictures it came up with. So 2 were fairly anodyne, and one in the middle looks quite animated. The guy in the middle is actually called John. So it turns out when Google threw up that job description, I've actually worked with John in the past. But there we go. So the animated person is called John. So just going from left to right. So I started out my life as an engineer. I worked in production operations. I didn't wear a hard hat, and that's a nice generated image. But yeah, so I learned about lean and running things and making processes better. Somehow, maybe it was a bang on the head, I ended up as a procurement director at some point. That's the kind of the picture in the middle. But I'm reformed now. If I don't tell you, you wouldn't know. So I'm integrated back into society. And then the bit on the right is probably the so more recently, and probably the last 20 years or so, I've kind of worked with a range of different organizations doing sort of operating model design and sort of business model transformation and things like that. And so I guess the one thing I want you to take from that, a bit like Steve, is that I am not an AI expert. I kind of don't know a lot about that in any way, shape or form. But I think I do know a bit about making processes better and making operations better. I kind of know a bit about the commercial relationships of life, and I kind of know how organizations work. So I guess my sort of foray into this, and maybe why I'm here today, sort of came from experimenting, really, and kind of out of curiosity. So I was just going to go through a bit of that journey, maybe show you the product that we kind of ended up with, and then we can sort of take some questions from there. So let me just make this work. So kind of the journey. So I'm going to talk a bit briefly, maybe hopefully not too dark, about housing operating models, and then I'll talk about how I sort of bumped into a bit of technology that kind of sounded interesting, and kind of put the 2 things together. So if I think about housing operating models, then you can't easily increase income, and therefore for housing associations you kind of need to be low cost, because you can't recover increased costs in increased income. And so if you want a low cost operating model, then complexity is a bit of an enemy for that, because kind of dealing with complexity means you end up having increased costs. And historically that meant through employing more people to deal with the complexity. So in housing, some of that complexity is unavoidable. You can't get away from it, but actually there are bits that we could do something with. So I guess I kind of started from a bit of the kind of the thought place of, okay, could we use some of this new technology to help us deal with some bits of complexity? And that was kind of the exam question. And then I know normally it's 6 degrees of separation, but actually it was only 2 for us, in that actually through knowing someone else, actually it turned out we knew someone that had been researching into natural language at the University of Turin, of all places, and they'd been at it for a chunk of time. And so I've retrospectively engineered, or sort of put the title of what the product was or what it is technically. I didn't know this at the time, but essentially it's a kind of RAG model, and it's a thing, and Guy or others may well, and if you know already, and I'll try, hopefully I won't crash this, but essentially it's a way of keeping your data private and providing greater sort of accuracy into the use of language models or LLMs. And when you ask it questions, it comes back and gives you a more accurate answer. So that was the bit of functionality or capability they had. And so it helps kind of extracting information out of documents and then providing structured answers back. So that was we through knowing someone else, we sort of found a way of accessing that sort of capability. And so the kind of use case, so where do we start? So it kind of started with, and this is a bit of complexity that is in operate models in housing associations. And so it's around repairs and how do you manage the commercial cost of repairs. And so, if in any contract that you have with any supplier, you've got a choice of either you go for a fixed price or you just go based on cost plus. You kind of got 2 choices. So if you go for cost plus, the downside of that is you end up with suppliers with no incentive to do things more efficiently. So that's a negative. If you go for a fixed price answer, then you are in some way transferring delivery risk to the supplier. But you can't do that in an unlimited way, because if you give me unlimited risk, I'm going to just price that and it'll almost be too expensive. So you end up going, okay, so I want to limit some of the risk transfer, which means there are then some exclusions to the scope of what I put in the fixed price. And then if I have exclusions, that then means that I've got to then check the charges of those So typically, if you're a repairs contractor, you're aspiring to increase your revenue by sort of 8 to 10% through how you manage your exclusions. And so those uplifts in revenue means that actually you end up with commercial tension throughout the life of that contract. So normally in a normal commercial relationship, you give me a tender, we agree a price, we sign a contract, and then we all move on, because the commercial tension's been done at the point we sign a contract. With how we manage repairs, that's not the case. We end up distrusting our contractors almost throughout the life of the contract because we think they're trying to get one over on us. And so the way in which we then try and control that is that we use QSs or other people to check invoices, essentially based on their knowledge of what the contract is that's in their head. They read an invoice and then they either say, yes, that invoice was valid or not valid. And you typically, because you can't sample everything because it's a big old task and you'd end up costing too much, you do sort of a 10% sampling. But actually, when you look at some of the costs of some of the structure of some of these contracts, that commercial review cost can almost, so every £1 you spend on a plumber or an electrician, you can spend another £1 on commercial management. And so, when we say we don't have enough money, well, actually we do have money, but it is being used in an inefficient way. So I guess the exam question we started with was saying, okay, could I do a 100% review of all exclusions, and can I do that in a more efficient way using some of the new technologies that exist? That was kind of the thought process. So we've ended up, and I'll just very quickly, I'll sort of put it up on the screen. We've ended up with a model that essentially, using that RAG model, it understands the contract and it understands all the exclusions, it understands the SOR rates. It's retrainable. So if we change the contract, I take the knowledge I've given it out and I give it a new set of knowledge, and therefore it will just work off of that. But essentially, the model we've got reads PDF invoices, so I can feed it PDF invoices, and it will then come back and either say, yes, that invoice is okay to be paid because it's in line with what we were expecting, with what was in the contract, or it says, don't pay this because actually it's an invalid charge, or it will come back and then say, oh, I don't know about this one, please can you look further? So it will flag things, so it won't just make things up. Yes, it has something, but it's more, it's able to say, I'm uncertain based on the knowledge I've got, so please could you check this further? And so actually what you then got, we have an ability to, instead of doing a 10% sample of invoices, actually I can check every one. And so you've got a much greater commercial control, and actually it's pretty low cost to do. and actually it can run along in the background, and I don't need to sort of employ lots of other people. So I am just going to put it up and then hope that the internet works. So kind of very, very little money has been spent on the user interface. So you can spend more money on this. Essentially, this was a proof of concept to say, could we use that RAG model? Is it capable of understanding the contract? Can it then read a PDF? And can it compare the two and give me an answer? So I well, just, and this is the bit where it's almost like working with children and animals on TV. But let's hopefully, well, I mean, it's say you can automate this user interface. Like, this is just a sort of crude file.
Sorry, Phil. I think we can still see the presentation.
Yeah, still seeing the presentation. That is not how it's supposed to work. Stop sharing. Let me go and, a bit like everyone else, I use. There. Does that work? Let me go back one stage then, and let me add a document. So this is, manually, you wouldn't, if you're going to do this at scale, you could have automated this. This is just kind of a proof of concept. But essentially, I'm sort of loading a PDF invoice, and this is where you kind of wish the internet was going to go fast enough. It did just do it, and it's now going slower. This is where I wasn't hoping to fill with more blethering, but that might be what I end up doing. Okay, so it's done it. There we go. Here we go. So essentially, I kind of knew this because I knew the invoice was non-compliant. I kind of know what the contract is. So let me just bring this down. So essentially, this is based on a sort of price per property contract, and the repair that's been carried out here is repairing the door lock. Now I know, based on the contract, that repairing a door lock is not an exclusion to the contract. And so what it's picked up here is that essentially there is the SOR to repair the door, or the door lock, which is zero rated value because there's no cost. It's already in a fixed price. What they've tried to do here is charge you for an hour and a quarter of labour to do the repair. The SOR includes the labour cost, and therefore it's rejected as saying there's additional labour charge, you shouldn't pay it. So it's sort of pinging that invoice up and going, that's not okay. So I am just going to go backwards, and I'll show you which one did I want. I made a note earlier. So these are just a range of others that we have looked at before. I'm going to get to the one. Let me just hide that. So let me just go over here. That was the one I wanted. So this is where we've bulk uploaded some invoices, and you can kind of see where it's gone. It picked these up and said these, for green, that it's in line with what I was expecting. Red, it's saying that doesn't comply with the contract terms. And this one, it's saying, I don't know about that one. Please, could you have a look at it? And so this is, say, at the moment, it's just a crude user interface. You can make it do whatever you want. If you want APIs, you can create APIs. So if you want to feed it into a system to automate the outputs of this. But essentially, this was built around a use case of checking that sort of month-end application for payment process. So I'm just going to go back, and I'm doing this in a clunky way because I don't know how better to do it. I'm just going to go back and go back. I've just got a couple more slides, and then I will be done. So if I can just get my mouse in the right place on the right screen. Which I am failing with there. Okay. So one of the bits I hadn't thought through when we started on this journey was what the impact might be on the overall process. So actually, kind of the use case we had, and so I just drawn a simple kind of repairs process that goes from, we raise a job, you know, we allocate the resource, or the contractor allocates the resource, they, you know, some materials we have to manage. At some point then somebody intervenes. If we've outsourced this service, you know, the contractor will then look at that pricing of that repair and decide, is that an inclusion or an exclusion, and how to price it. You know, there's then a variations process of if it's over and above, so you go through a variations process. Sometimes you bump into more complex repairs that go down a slightly different path, and then you get the job completed, and then there's a financial completion. So it's just kind of very simple linear life cycle of a repair. So the use case I started with was right at the end of the journey in that financial completion, and can I check the costs? But actually, when you realise I've got a tool that understands the contract and can take some input, and it can then decide, make an assessment about the valuation of that repair, you kind of think, okay, so where else could I use that in this journey? And so actually I could take the same capability and I could use it to manage variations. So at the moment, variations is a point where, you know, delays can occur. You know, we put time into the journey, it negatively impacts the resident because we're thinking about, can I afford it and how do I want to improve it? So I could use it there, or I could go one step further. And at the moment, say, if you're a contractor, use a QS to assess the value of a repair, and they're taking data out of a PDA or whichever device has been used by the operative, and then deciding about, is that a chargeable event or non-chargeable event? And so I guess Nirvana would be is if the housing association and the contractor both trust the model and how it's working, and therefore we would kind of want to do some auditing of that. I could take that human out of the loop right at the start. And actually, if we agree the pricing between us and the contractor at the point where we see what the job is, actually all of that, you know, variations management and then financial completion at the end of the process, I think I could do in quite a different way. And actually, I think it also then gives us the opportunity for other options about commercial models and how we transfer risk and how we price risk. So actually, I kind of didn't really think of that when I started on the journey, but now I look back and go, okay, it actually gives me different options about that journey and that process and that commercial management of that service, which is, you know, can be painful. I'm going to stop very quickly because I don't leave enough time for questions. I guess I kind of start from I'm not an expert in AI in any way, shape or form, but I kind of start from okay, I very much would kind of like the idea of testing and piloting and seeing what happens. And in doing so, I kind of learned something. And I've learned a chunk of stuff along the way because I would never use Retrieval Augmented Generation at the start of this journey because I didn't know what it was. And I'll quote it like I think I know, and make it sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. So actually, kind of, you know, I think there's a 2x2 matrix here, but actually you can think of this in different ways. I think there are elements of what we do in housing that we can get on with and do today. And so actually, kind of, if the scale of benefit is big, and in repairs, you know, we spend a lot of money on it, and the service impacts to residents is also quite big. So it's kind of higher scale of benefit. But actually, what I've got there is just a single data source, which is a set of invoices. And so actually, I think there are opportunities in our operate models where we can use capabilities like this, and we can get started on it now. I don't need a perfect curated data set across multiple data sets in order to do something that is of value. And so kind of my one kind of urge for everyone is to think, maybe this model isn't the right model. You can think of it different ways or different models, but it's just a way of thinking that says, kind of, there's some things that we could do now, and what can I get on with whilst I also think about how I better align my data sets and clean data sets so that I can do other things in the future, maybe where I need multiple data sets. But actually, there's the stuff that I think I can sort of get on with now. And I am just gonna sort of finish up, got one last slide and I'm done. So kind of, are there other use cases for this kind of capability? I think there are. I probably don't know everything. I was talking to one housing association last week. I won't name them because maybe I haven't told everyone, so it'd be unfair of me to you know, announce it live on this call today. So one of the potential use cases we were talking about last week was, could I use my lease agreements that I've got with homeowners, because we know we have a challenge around service charging. Can I use a similar model or the similar capability to understand what my lease agreements are, and can I use that to better allocate service charging in a way. So that's a thing that we'll probably try and work together to see if we can do that. Can we use the same capability? So I guess I've got some questions. So is it a long-term answer? Will something better turn up? Are there ways of addressing? So I don't know if it's a long-term answer. Will something better turn up? Probably yes. Are there other ways of addressing the problem? I don't know, not qualified enough to know the answer. But I think what I would say is that the cost of acquiring this capability is relatively low. And therefore, you're not tying yourself into a long-term obligation. And so my view is, if it gives me value now, why would I not use it? And if something better turns up next year because of all the investment that's going in, I'll just pivot and use something better in the future. So that's kind of where I'm at, and it's probably where I'm sort of going to finish, is that this didn't need a perfectly curated data set. Not that they're a bad thing to do, but actually there are things that I think we can do today, and that's probably where I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing at that point.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bill, and thanks again, Stephen. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat, but also feel free to put your hand up if you have a question that you'd like to ask. I don't know, Stephen, if you've had a chance to have a look at some of the questions. If you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I've had a look. Thanks for the questions. Catherine was asking around sources of data, and the answer is it was just our own internal data in terms of customer profile, types of property they were living in, repairs histories, or various factors. But no, it was all internal data. Just on the model, I mean, I was saying a little bit, and again, I don't know the technicalities, but what they did was they did the model, and then there's I like an 1980s analogy, that we did a bit of Back to the Future. So we applied the model to historic tenancies to see if we could then predict the ones that actually did end. And that moves on to one of the later questions about model accuracy. The model's 84% accurate, and its measures preventability is 81% accurate. So, again, because I'm not technical and I'm a pragmatist, I've always kind of worked to the 80-20 rule, and that pretty much falls in with that, really. So, and the proof is in the pudding, as it were, in terms of we are keeping people in their properties ultimately. So that's that. In terms of mold and condensation, that's not being used for AI yet. That's more, I was saying that as an example of being able to have coherent data in the dataverse, enables us then to be able to build the app using Power Apps and Canvas-driven apps to collect the survey data, to then feed back into our housing management system to set off a workflow. So it's more of a data capture tool at this stage, and then setting off workflow. One of the clever things that our technical people have done is being able to write that link between the dataverse world and our current housing management system. So we are starting to use that data into models, but the Power App is not, and the DMC work is not being applied to that just yet. I don't understand your question, Guy. I'm sorry. The decision tree, without being too technical, but
yeah. So without being too technical, so the neural networks are like a dodgy black box where you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
The decision tree, oftentimes you can. It says on each of the nodes, each of the decisions, it tells you like, oh, over 80 years old, more likely to have a tenancy failure in the next 2 years. Right, and it's explicit, so the decision tree is literally stepping through, and so there it's auditable. So you've trained up this model that is it's the tree visualization is helpful, and as you step through, then you can visually see, if you look at it, what the factors are that's making it think that somebody would fall into that category. And it will be whatever you put into the model. It will be age, whatever, like age, like anything, whatever you've got in the model will be driving that. But you can read it off. It's not black box in that sense normally. So I just wondered whether you were looking at the algorithm and then using that to say, oh, we don't need to use the decision tree per se, but we can use the insights that we get as a result of the modeling that we've done in order to do these proactive interventions. So I was interested in whether you were framing it like that, your data scientist, or whether you were saying the machine says go and do this.
No, it's very much the former, because the models do. I mean, we talk about the model, we're probably on about the second, third, fourth iteration of the model. A previous data scientist started it. We've got a new guy come in and he's completely rewritten the model using the similar sort of logic, I guess, but he's done it in a more efficient way, I believe. I say all these words without knowing what it actually involves. But what I would say is, in terms of how the model was developed, and that goes back to what we're saying about it being a combination of cool, cutting-edge data science techniques with old-school housing management, is those factors have been discussed, and to see what impact they're going to have on the model, to see what's a stronger factor to make them the model more and more accurate. So, as I said, the model is being revised. Somebody asked the question of how often we refresh it. Well, we refresh the data in it pretty regularly. We have a monthly meeting, for example, to look at the new top 10 tenancies and plan those that wraparound support. But any discussions that come out of that, or from a practical basis, we went and visited Mrs. Smith last month, and this was actually a factor. Well, that's feeding back into the data scientists. So it's very much a two-way process in that regard. The void, again, I'm not sure. Is that wanting access to knowledge of what we've done for the tenancy prediction model, or is that something else?
So my question is a slightly broader one. So you're making some models that are potentially useful to other providers that have problems that are the same as yours, right? On the damp and mold question earlier, literally yesterday I was speaking with a small provider who have already built a damp and mold prediction model before Awaab's law, in order to, using only nothing about the tenant, but only the assets and repairs data, in order to predict whether they needed to do a proactive intervention in order to prevent damp and mold from requiring then a spike as a result of Awaab's law. Yeah. So they built a little model that goes and predicts their damp and mold. Maybe useful to other providers. I'm thinking that what you've described, depending upon like the data formatting and the data stats part of it, might be useful to other providers too. And so I was asking whether there was some sort of appetite, whether you thought it might be within the realms of the possible to make your models available to others.
Yeah, I mean, I think in principle, yes. I would say in terms of that sort of model, the point I was trying to make in my presentation is we're only able to do the cool data science stuff because our core data is we're really confident with our core data. We're less confident, if I'm honest, with that some of our asset data, but that's why that was our priority, to get it out of the old systems. And I'll be honest, lots of our core asset management data was in spreadsheets, and we're getting it out of there and moving it into the Dataverse. So that's been the first lot of data we've moved across, and we're building on that data, and that data's purity, for want of a better word, by the app is feeding straight into that Dataverse world, the information. And so I think we were wanting to do that before we started moving into modeling, because we know we're going to be modeling on robust data. So yeah, there's some learning both ways, perhaps us in our application of Microsoft tools and data science, but we could learn from colleagues in terms of when they've got that data, here's a model that can do something useful with it. I think that was the questions.
So yeah, you had a question here about using Copilot agents. I don't know if anybody wants to chip in on that, or if Luke, you want to just describe some of what you're trying to achieve outcome-wise.
Yeah, so I'm from Southdown, which is a relatively small social housing organisation down in Lewes in Brighton. And it's pretty much just me in the data housing team. So I'm dealing with all of our, we use QL as our asset management system. We've got spreadsheets, we've got various issues with our core data that we're trying to resolve. But obviously finances are tight, so we're kind of looking for options, certainly in the short term, to come up with process automation. The main one being around compliance with reading PDFs. So I've looked into using OCR tools, but they tend to cost quite a bit if you develop them yourself. But then someone mentioned about Copilot Studio and using Copilot agents as a prompt to be able to go and read PDFs and then digitally store that, whether that's in a SharePoint file or whether that's in the metaverse with 365, so the dataverse. So yeah, I just wonder whether anyone else on the call is at that very early stage of using AI, and whether anyone had used Copilot agents as an option.
I haven't used Copilot agents, but Luke, I also did a small project on the Google Cloud platform using optical character recognition as one of the ways to kind of ingest unstructured PDF data. This was around Building Safety Act, when things were changing quite quickly a couple of years ago, and we were trying to understand as an organization, I was working for Lend-Lease at the time, what it meant to us. It worked, but it was very expensive. So would not recommend that as an approach in terms of creating on Google, or probably I would imagine Microsoft's pricing is similar, solely relying on the infrastructure from a large, one of the top 2 established providers of enterprise software in the world. There are other tools that I came across, like Dockling from IBM, which is free and open source. And with a little bit of coding, Python kind of scaffolding, you can connect up free tools like that, which are open source and available under sort of MIT licenses or similar, which was much more cost effective. So yeah, saving like thousands of pounds per month. So
yeah, okay, cheers, Tom.
So I'm aware of time, so we are on the hour. If people want to hang around to talk about some of these things, because I've got some things that I could share with Luke around that as well, potentially. So we'll call it a day. So next month we'll meet a week later, so it'll be the second Friday because it's sort of New Year time, and we'll do a review of 2025 in AI in housing, and we'll look at what 2026 might hold as well. I'm hoping to get an additional guest speaker to help us to put that together, so we'll see how that goes. But thank you very much for your engagement this year. It's been a good one, so thank you very much. And if you want to chat some more, just hang around and we'll chat some more.
Thank you.